Steel Force at Dorney Park is easily one of the most interesting roller coasters that I have ridden. And in this review, we'll be going over everything about this coaster. Its layout, the trains, and of course, some of the interesting design decisions that were made for this coaster. And why this is definitely one of the most interesting roller coasters you will ever ride. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so Steel Force is Dorney Park's tallest, fastest, and longest roller coaster. Steel Force stands 205 feet tall with a 200-foot drop, features 5,600 feet of track, and reaches a top speed of 75 miles per hour. This coaster can operate with up to 3 trains, but when I was there and from what I can gather, it appears that Steel Force almost always operates with 2 trains. But nevertheless, there's almost never a substantial wait, and the dispatches are actually pretty quick, especially given that there are only 2 trains, so even if there is a bit of a line, it will move consistently. The trains are your classic Morgan Hypercoaster trains. I mean, they're alright. They aren't super comfortable, and I wouldn't necessarily say the lap bar is incredibly comfortable either. But at least it's not super, like these trains are not a super tight fit, and there aren't really any major complaints with these trains, but they're just alright. Now yes, could these trains be better? Of course, but they really aren't that bad. Especially considering that this coaster is now 27 years old. Now you may be worried, is this coaster super rough? Because it is 27 years old and opened up in 1997. But to my surprise, this coaster was actually very smooth. There were a few jolts here and there, but there really wasn't like a rattle, and I would not call this coaster rough whatsoever. In fact, I would even go as far as saying that Hydra is probably rougher than this coaster. And yes, Hydra's not super rough or anything, but it definitely did have a noticeable rattle, which to my surprise, Steel Force did not. Alright, it's time to go through the layout of Steel Force element by element to learn how it actually feels like to ride this coaster. After a very long ascent up the lift hill, I mean, it may take a minute, but at least you get a good view of the park, right? Right? I'm just joking. It does take about a minute, but you do get a very nice view, you get the breeze, and it's actually kind of pleasant. You then begin to crest over the lift hill and head into the drop. And it definitely takes a second to get there. There we go. Anyway, you do get a little bit of floater airtime, but it really isn't anything crazy. I mean, the floater airtime is there, but it definitely is not super strong. After your 200-foot drop, you reach your top speed of 75 miles per hour and ascend up your first airtime hill. Similar to the drop, there is definitely floater airtime. It is there, but I would not say it is super strong airtime. You'll lift out of your seat a little bit, but it's still pretty weak floater airtime. Next, you begin your ascent into the helix slash turnaround slash kind of airtime hill beginning part. You get the idea. You then enter a long swooping helix with the wind in your face, and I kid you not, this feels like the fastest part of the ride. Not immediately after the drop. This right here feels like the fastest part of the ride. The wind's in your face, and it's actually probably the highlight of the ride too. Yeah, I never thought I'd really say it, but the turnaround is almost the best part of this coaster. It's kind of crazy. And the thing that surprised me most about this was just how smooth it was. There's a little bump exiting the helix, but again, the entire thing is just, it feels so smooth. So that was definitely another thing that impressed me about Steel Force. Next, you glide up into my favorite element ever, mid-course brake run. Hooray. Luckily, it doesn't trim off a ton of speed, but it's still mid-course brake run. It's not great. But you do get a little pop of floater airtime heading off the mid-course. Following your drop off the mid-course, you're going to enter a series of back-to-back bunny hills. And when you see these, you probably immediately think, oh, that's going to be a ton of airtime and easily the head of the ride. But unfortunately, none of these hills really give the airtime you expect. It's the same pretty weak floater airtime that you've been getting throughout the ride. And I was really shocked by this. I genuinely thought I was going to be getting some really good airtime from this. But it unfortunately just was not there. But at least the tunnel is cool. And I don't know, I could have been riding this on a super slow day or just a bad day for the coaster in general. It really didn't feel like it, but it still could have been. But I feel like the general consensus is you really just do not get a ton of airtime from that part of the ride. Even though you take one look at this and immediately assume this thing's going to have great airtime. It just unfortunately does not. You finally finish off the ride with a little turn before gliding up into the brake run, ending your 3-minute long experience. Now this coaster is not a bad coaster whatsoever. There were just some interesting design choices that were made that just made this an interesting ride experience. Oh, and if you are enjoying the video so far, then a sub to the channel would be fantastic, because we're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers here by the end of the year, and I need your help. Alright, back to the interesting design choices. Like, for instance, the profiling of this drop is very interesting. It's almost like a mini pre-drop before the main drop. It's not bad, but it's just interesting. Also, why did they choose a massive helix as a turnaround? And by no means is it bad. In fact, it's the best part of the ride in my opinion. But it's just an interesting choice to use such a huge element as a turnaround. And finally, why did they choose to have the same exact bunny hill over and over and over again? Again, not a bad part of the ride. Not necessarily a bad thing whatsoever. Just an interesting choice, because a lot of times manufacturers will choose to switch it up and maybe make the bunny hills off axis or just change it up a little bit. So here's my final thoughts. There were a lot of interesting choices made in the design process of Steel Force to make this coaster a very unique and interesting ride to experience. And I think the moral of the story with this entire ride is that it is interesting, but not in a bad way necessarily. Could there have been some elements that could have been executed better? Yes, that's a fact for every single coaster in existence. But there are just a couple of choices that really gives character to this ride and makes it unique and different. And not necessarily in a bad way. So for Steel Force's final grade, I'll give it a B-. It really doesn't have great airtime or great forces in general, but it's still a tall, fast, and long ride that's definitely still fun for everyone. And this coaster does do its job very well, which is to be a good supporting cast member to the main couple rides at Dorney Park. So go check out Steel Force whenever you visit Dorney Park. And if you enjoyed the video, drop a like down below and subscribe to help us get to 1,000 subscribers. And as always, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.